The Shazam Isis Hour. A full hour of exciting adventure with the world's most powerful mortals. Captain Marvel, champion of truth and justice. And Isis, dedicated foe of evil. Both together in The Shazam Isis Hour. Chosen from among all others by the immortal elders Solomon, Hercules, Atlas, Zeus, Achilles, Mercury, Billy Batson and his mentor travel the highways and byways of the land on a never-ending mission to right wrongs, to develop understanding, and to seek justice for all. In time of dire need, young Billy has been granted the power by the immortals to summon awesome forces at the utterance of a single word. A word which transforms him in a flash into the mightiest of mortal beings, Captain Marvel.
Oh, no, thank you. I can take care of it from here.
Shouldn't you cancel a Mayday before you leave?
Oh, I didn't send a Mayday.
You didn't?
Well, no way. I figure if you can't do it yourself, don't do it. I mean, I don't ask for help from nobody.
Welcome back, my friends, to an all-new episode of the Shazam Isis podcast. It's your old mentor, John S. Drew here, and we're continuing our journey down the highways and byways of the land, exploring those episodes of the two iconic shows of the 1970s from Saturday morning CBS television there, Shazam and the Secrets of Isis. And continuing this journey with me here is the big red cheese himself, Mr. Richard F. Lee. Hey, Richard.
Well, hello, Mentor John. It's been a while, or should I even say, hello, Felix, to my Oscar.
So you're taking on the Oscar role, huh?
Absolutely. Now, what was it, if you recall, on Saturday morning television? I think this was a Hanna-Barbera cartoon where they had Spiffy playing the Jack Klugman part. Or do you remember that? Or no, it was probably the Tony Randall part, not the Jack Klugman part, where they had the Odd Couple television show in cartoon form, where they were dogs, and I think it was the Oscar character was a cat. Do you remember that?
That sounds vaguely familiar.
Here they are, the oddball couple. They're a couple that's a couple of oddballs. Anything the oddball couple ever do becomes a series of foul balls. They're really just as opposite as crooked and straight. And no matter where they're going, if there's one that's early, the other one is late. Talk about the oddball couple. They're a couple that's a couple of oddballs.
Is fussy, very proper and clean,
while the other one has got a very special talent for messing up the team. We're talking about the oddball couple. They're a couple that can double as foul balls. Oddballs. 8 balls.
I wonder, why would I bring this up, John? That come out of the blue, Oscar and Felix?
No, not at all. I mean, we are going to be discussing today the second season finale of Shazam, and the title, appropriately enough, is The Odd Couple. So I think it's appropriate.
You're right. It was. It was a cool segue, wasn't it?
It was a cool...
Now I got that music going through my head, John. I can't get rid of it.
There's your earworm for today, you know, and it's funny too, because you're not entirely sure, looking at it, who the odd couple are in this, or who they're trying to say the odd couple are. But it's interesting, as we're finishing this second season, I thought this would be the perfect opportunity. If you remember a little while back, I talked about my journey watching the Captain Marvel 1940s movie serials. Well, I decided to go to eBay, another friend of mine, and I picked up the run of Isis, the 8 issues that there were. And I also picked up the issue she first appears in of Shazam. I thought we could take a few moments just to talk about this because it's appropriate considering we're dealing with an episode with Captain Marvel and Isis teaming up. Well, they also kind of team up in the comic book. Now, do you have this issue?
I do. I have the entire run of Shazam issues 1 through 35 from DC. I don't have the Isis issues, the 8 issues. I got actually bored with the Isis comic when it came out. I read it, I followed it, and it was the quality of the comic went down, the sales went down, so it was cut off at issue 8, as I recall, leaving a cliffhanger of a story that was not even resolved because the publisher decided not to go forward with it. But I remember, rather excitedly so, seeing issue 25 of the Shazam comic.
25.
Issue 25, where there was a direct tie-in with Isis. And we were all wondering, I say we, those of us who followed the DC comic and watched the television show, when Captain Marvel would meet Isis in the pages of the Shazam comic. So issue 25 was a very auspicious beginning. But interestingly enough, the Shazam comic at the time did not follow the television format until issue 26, the very next issue, when Billy was joined with Mentor, who turned out to be Uncle Dudley, and they're driving around in the open road motorhome. And with the Eternity phone and with summoning the elders through the Eternity phone, that was never done in the comic until issue 26, the next issue, after Captain Marvel and Isis teamed up for the first time in issue 25.
Now, here's the thing, though. Yeah, they send Billy off and he does the traveling in the RV and they've got their Mentor character, even though it's Uncle Dudley and stuff. But did he continue to deal with supervillains in the
Yes,
comic?
he did. Yes, he did.
See,
now, that's very interesting you bring that up, John, because I always wanted to compare and contrast the television shows that we like here. We're doing, obviously, the Shazam Isis podcast. We critique only the television shows. But I was a fan of the comic book at the same time, and I wanted to show how they were the same and how they were different. I wanted both mediums to borrow from each other. But in the comic book series, you saw Billy and Mentor Uncle Dudley pursuing Dr. Savannah and pursuing the supervillains like Ibeck and King Kull at one point, and all these other characters, Aunt Minerva, as I recall. And I still have those, like once in a blue moon, I'll go back and review them. But yeah, they kept up the same story formats that were established in the DC Fawcett universe and did not try to adapt itself so closely to the TV show that it might not have worked on the printed page like it worked in live action.
Well, it's interesting you say that because, yeah, then you get to Isis, the comic book, and most of the stories, maybe the odd backup story. Most of the stories had her fighting some super-powered being, usually another god, but sometimes some other things, whether it's a freak of science or something where, like, there's an issue where, like, they open a dimension and these creatures come through and stuff. But they're all super-powered beings. It's only this episode, this issue, number 25, that is actually the closest thing to the TV show.
It is closest to the TV show, and I know that we're going to probably have a few fans out there who are going to want to scour eBay for issue 25 of Shazam, where Isis is on the cover and Captain Marvel is flying through the scene. That is closest to the TV show. In that comic issue, it's Cindy Lee who gets in trouble, and Captain Marvel is going to rescue her, but not in time. Isis turns up to save the day, and that's how, in the comic issue, Captain Marvel and Isis meet for the very first time. And as we're going to see in the review of this episode, that's completely different. There's no crossover from the comic universe to the television universe.
Yeah. In fact, actually, Captain Marvel really doesn't do much except fly in at the last moment and go, "Oh, I've always wanted to meet you."
Exactly. And I think it was done as a fan service because DC or national periodical publications ended up getting the license to do Isis, and they wanted to try to copy the TV show in the sense of using the Shazam comic as a launching pad to help Isis in her own series. And as we see in this particular episode, The Odd Couple, and what we're going to see also in the third season of Shazam and in later on with Isis, crossovers of Captain Marvel and Isis helping each other out.
Mm-hmm.
And that's as a cross promotion of each other's television shows, perhaps. The best example of this would be the $6 Million Man helping the Bionic Woman get on her feet for the first season when she was launched in her own television series. And you saw from time to time Steve and Jamie on some adventure sharing each other's spotlight in the episodes that they were on together. They were always the highest rated episodes. I believe they were the highest rated episodes, but they always seemed to turn out to be the best episodes when you had those two superheroes together who had their own television series. And likewise here you have Captain Marvel and Isis. They're going to be sharing the spotlight for the first time on The Odd Couple, and they only shared that one spotlight together in that one issue of the comic book, and that's the only time you're ever going to see them together there.
Yeah. It's nice, though. I mean, the story, like I said, really reads like it could be an episode of the TV show, right down to the very end where Isis, gives us the lesson of the issue and such. And it's the only time they'll do that as well. And she's talking directly to the reader because she says, I'll see you in my own comic book in 3 weeks' time.
Yeah. Now, wouldn't that be weird? That kind of reminds me of an episode of, the Naked Gun series, Police Squad, where out of absurdity, the characters will break the fourth wall and just look into the camera and say something.
Yeah.
And that issue, issue 25, also reminded me of the episodes of Isis that we see Joanna Cameron looking into the camera, spiking the lens, breaking the fourth wall, winking at it. And I can see where it appears that the artist in that issue 25, tried to copy that. It just looks that way. There's a panel closer to the end where she does exactly that.
Well, that ties in, too, with the fact that this issue of the comic book came out in 1976, so it's Isis's second season. It's not one of these things where the writer, the artist and such, is going off maybe one script or two, and they're just jumping right in with Isis. Isis already had a year to develop when they decided to start rolling out a comic.
Yes, you're right. And I think I mentioned it before when we were interviewing Jackson Bostwick for episode 0 of the podcast, that when the show was on its last legs, when Shazam was on its last legs, the third season only produced a few episodes. Mm-hmm. And 1976 was that year that Isis and Shazam were already established characters. Kids have already been watching them for a full year and a half. And the comic book was lagging behind. They were not cutting edge. They were arriving late to try to establish any kind of relationship or continuity between the television series and the comic book. And so issue 25 introduces Captain Marvel meeting Isis. Issue 26 introduces Billy Batson and Mentor in the motorhome when the show was in its last season. And at that, we would only see from issue 26 to issue 35 when the Shazam comic would come to an abrupt end, and they would stop trying to copy the TV show, and future Captain Marvel stories would then appear in World's Finest Comics as an add-on. Shazam no longer had its own title. Isis only lasted 8 issues. They wanted to keep the character of Captain Marvel going, but there was not enough profit anymore with fans going out and buying the book once a month or once every other month, and they kept the Captain Marvel stories sandwiched in between other heroes like Green Arrow, Batman, and Superman, and others who were better sellers.
One last thing I just want to say about this issue is that I also like the fact that we get 2 pages of the story devoted to Isis's origin.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
And you notice the difference between the origin in the comic versus the origin that we see at the beginning of every episode of The Secrets of Isis.
That being
dum, 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 dum.
With this, well, they get into the whole scroll and
yes, they get in the scroll and how she finds the amulet. The amulet is a necklace in the TV show, and in the comic origin, it's a headband.
Oh yeah, you're right.
Why would they change that? it would make no sense to me that the artist would take liberties with that, because they had the likeness of Joanna Cameron and the other actors for these comic books. Why would they change what appears to be a significant detail when they're transitioning, in this case, from the TV show to a comic book? The change does not make any sense to me. The continuity problem does not make any sense to me. And I caught that as a kid when I was looking at the comic. I'm going, hey, that's not what they show on the TV show.
Mm-hmm. Well, Denny O'Neil was the writer of the issue, and he wrote the first issue of Isis, and then he became, or he was throughout the run of it, the editor of the comic as well. And I've been trying to get a hold of him to see if we can have him come on and talk about the series, and including talking about what the plans were had the series gone beyond issue 8. So hopefully, we may be able to do that, because, Denny O'Neil is a pretty big guy in terms of comics and such. He was one of the people responsible for a number of my favorite titles over at Marvel Comics, including, well, not over at Marvel, but at DC. He was also one of the people who basically revitalized Batman after the 66 series.
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
I remember that distinctly, yes.
Yeah.
In fact, Frank Miller is the one, if we're going to talk comics for a second, Frank Miller is the one who's often credited with making Batman dark, turning him into the Dark Knight. Well, Denny O'Neil was trying to turn Batman dark in the early 70s because the comedy of the 1960s show was a little too much. And I think they wanted to make the character a lot more grown up and a lot more mature.
Mm-hmm. Well, he was doing something too, with Isis in that regard. That whole cliffhanger, which we'll get into as we get into our reviews of the comics and such, it took a pretty dark turn.
Yes, it did.
Yeah.
It really, in fact, that could not have translated into television at all, and not just because of the lack of special effects technology for the time, but because of the darkness of the tone of the comic series. It was just too dark, and it was too, I want to say, occultic, perhaps, something that really was out of Doctor Strange more than something you could easily relate to for a kid's show.
Now, that's interesting. Okay, I hadn't thought of it that way, but maybe there is something to that it was more veering towards Doctor Strange.
I thought it was. I didn't follow Doctor Strange very much. It wasn't as psychedelic as Doctor Strange, but certainly Isis in the comic series, it really went dark, and it went very weird.
Well, yeah. Yeah, it did. It did. So, what I figure is that since this is the end of the second season with Shazam, we're going to be doing, a slew of Isis episodes as we finish out the rest of her first season before we get into their final seasons. So I thought that with each episode, kind of like what I did with, The Adventures of Captain Marvel, the 40s movie serial, is that we'll take a look at one of the issues each time for the next 8 episodes.
And that's going to be an adventure all in itself.
Yeah. But speaking of adventures and speaking of Isis and Captain Marvel, let's talk about this episode, The Odd Couple.
The Odd Couple. This aired back on October 18th, 1975. It was written by Sid Morris and directed by Hollingsworth Morse.
Yes. And our guest stars for this episode, Steve Benedict as Don Haley, Cindy Eilbacher, I hope I'm saying that right, as Susie Walsh, and special guest star Joanna Cameron as Isis.
Yes, now, from what I understand, Cindy Eilbacher was the sister of Lisa Eilbacher, I believe. Mm-hmm. And Jackson had dated Lisa Eilbacher before.
Oh, okay.
So Hollywood's a small world.
Yeah.
So in the opening, what we see here is an airfield with planes. Now there's the character named Don. He just got his pilot's license and plans to fly his girlfriend Susie to his brother's wedding. Now, okay, Shazam fans, once again we are treated to that same faux rock music that appears from time to time.
Nervous, Susie?
Nervous? What's to be nervous? With an experienced pilot like you? Well, your license is almost 24 hours old.
I like the way you think. Let's go.
And what a way to end the second season of Shazam with putting this faux rock music in here that we heard in the first season, and we're going to hear again in the third season too. It just will not go away. So, Susie,
Don't you ever go any place without that tape recorder?
No, never. It's my security blanket.
and she puts her tape recorder on the dashboard of the plane. And now an insert shot here shows us that the compass on the dashboard shifts slightly. When she turns off the tape recorder, it shifts back into place. Now, that's setting us up for something really bad is going to happen.
Yeah.
Now, I think there's a reason why when you're on board an airplane, they tell you to turn off all your electronic devices.
Yeah.
Yeah. You don't want to shift the direction of the compass, folks.
Yeah.
So turn those electronic devices off.
You know, though, I did like this whole build up here. At first, I'm watching it. Because I watched it twice, this particular episode, because, the momentousness of having Isis on it as well. I watched it a second time. The first time I watched it, I thought that the opening was a bit... Well, first of all, it took a while to even get the names of the characters. But then in watching it again, I was reminded about some of the early episodes of The $6 Million Man, where they went into some detail in terms of, like, when Steve would have an airplane flight and he was the pilot, there was detail about that. Or when he was even an astronaut in one of the rocket launches, they would go through this whole thing with the checklists and everything. And they kind of do it here as well. They don't just simply say, hey, we're flying and, we'll cut away to the plane taking off. We actually build up to the takeoff, I should say.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
And it is rather impressive. It's realistic, because here you have a brand new pilot who knows what to say to taxi for takeoff on the runway. And I think they did that on the $6 Million Man also, or similar things like that, to try to show the audience and sell the audience that this is realistic. You have a real colonel who knew what it was to be in space and also to fly. So I can't say that there's really a relationship between the two shows here, except to give to the audience that they wanted to establish that they're doing something real that an adult perhaps could easily relate to, that this is something that's realistic. And of course, the plane, you do see the plane coming out on the runway. Someone's piloting that for real.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I did love the next scene, because here we've got Billy and Mentor on a beach playing checkers.
That, my boy, is the way the game of checkers is supposed to be played. You owe me $7 million.
$6 million.
I'll play you the limerick game. Double or nothing.
All right, you're on. 5-second limit.
Right. Whoever fails to come up with a line in 5 seconds loses.
Okay. Who starts?
Since I'm about to become a multimillionaire, you may begin.
There once was a man from Detroit.
Detroit. Who at quoit was extremely adroit.
So one day he tore.
The pants that he wore. Just in time.
So instead he played in a squate.
Skirt? That's S-K-I-R-T. It's pronounced skirt.
Not if you're from Brooklyn.
Well, you don't come from Brooklyn.
Well, if I did come from Brooklyn, that's how you pronounce it. So we're even.
Oh, no. I'm in the evening list of Solomon the judge.
The elders. You think they heard you? Oh, elders, fleet and strong and wise, appear before my seeking eyes.
Greetings, Billy.
Greetings, elders.
We would speak to you of pride, Billy. A two-edged sword. One edge is clean and bright. Pride in others and in self when justified. But the other edge is dull and tarnished. Pride that blinds a man to common sense, that prevents a man from asking for help when he needs it.
And there are times when every man needs help. Even Captain Marvel.
Captain Marvel?
Even he.
I don't understand.
You will, Billy, when the time is right.
And before we go, tell Mentor I declare the Limerick game a draw.
Farewell, Billy.
It's almost like a comedy routine, like Abbott and Costello, or Laurel and Hardy, or who else? Bud Costello. Yeah, Abbott Costello I was thinking of.
Abbott and Costello, Martin and Lewis.
Yes, I think so. I think this ranks up there in a nice little comic scene that could rival anything they've done.
Well,
it was well scripted and well acted.
It was well scripted and well acted, and the thing is, I think that's part of what I really like about it, because there are certain times where they try to do some comedy bits, and I think it falls flat. And it's not any fault of Les Tremayne or Michael Gray. I think it's just the writing wasn't as good. This was sharp. This was funny, the whole thing with Brooklyn and a droid and, trying to rhyme it with scoit. I mean, that was good, and they played it well.
Yes. Now, what if I remember this fact correctly, I think you can ask Michael Gray about this. Of course, you have two actors here, and it looks like they're by themselves. And in the story they are, but they're surrounded by a huge crew of people. Right. And there are people out there watching the filming who are not a part of the production, because this is a well-known television show, and you got a crowd out there. There's got to be somebody on the set for crowd control. I think there's people surrounding them. I don't know how many there were at the beach on this day when they were shooting this episode, but the way Michael Gray relates it, I think it's this episode, as a matter of fact, when they're sitting there, or they might be sitting in their dressing room chairs or whatever, that a woman comes up near Les and Mike, opens her blouse, lets her two puppies fall out, and yells, "Shazam!" Now, this is a family show, and they did not film that.
Of course.
As a kid, I would have loved it if they did, okay? But apparently that happened on set. I think it was this episode where it happened. Wow.
Yeah.
It kind of ruins your perception of reality. At least they kept the limerick clean.
Yes, they did, because limericks can sometimes be dirty.
Sometimes. The only limericks I can remember are the ones that are not repeatable, okay? But they kept it clean for a kid show.
Yeah.
Now, we heard the two-edged sword line in the prior episode, didn't we, John?
Yes, we did.
Now, at least they could run these episodes several weeks apart rather than consecutively. Now, anyway, everyone needs help, even Captain Marvel. And Billy again said, "Okay, folks, say it with us in unison. I don't understand." Even by the end of the second season, in this last episode of the second season, that almost becomes cliche, just like notify the proper authorities. Wouldn't you say, John?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You will, Billy.
And the promise, and the elder's promise, the comeback line is, "You will, Billy, you will." Now, after 2 seasons, Billy has not caught on that you will eventually understand, right? Solomon declares the limerick game a draw, which is it's a nice touch. Okay, it's okay.
Yeah. But anyway, just while this is all going on, in case we forgot, we cut back to the plane, and Susie's expressing her worries about flying, and Don reassures her that the compass is his guide.
Boy, is he screwed.
Yeah.
Oh dear. So we know that the opening scene with the tape recorder is going to have some effect on the compass. That's going to drive the first part of the plot, the first scene.
Right.
And it's establishing that there's going to be a rescue scene of Captain Marvel coming in at some point. And I think that's a good way to establish a dilemma. In a way, I kind of wish other episodes of Shazam would have set up dilemmas that early in the show, rather than wait to the very last.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because we're going to be introduced in just a moment with the first appearance of Captain Marvel before we even get to the last 5 minutes of the show. which I do have to admit, here we are in the second season, the last episode of the second season. By the second season, and certainly by the third season, Captain Marvel has made more frequent appearances than he ever did in the first season.
You're right.
So here, after they're flying over the water, Dawn assures that the compass is his guide and everything's going to be fine. We go back to the beach, and Billy is over-concerned that Captain Marvel is going to need help, and he hasn't spoken in 2 hours. So why is Billy so obsessed with this? Hasn't Captain Marvel ever needed help before?
Well, he has, and he's received it. There was the Double Trouble episode while he was in jail.
Yeah, and he got help from Jimmy McNichol, didn't he? What took me out of the episode was that, as a kid, I was aware of the Shazam mythos. I know that casual observers of the show aren't going to know any of this stuff. But as a fan of the Shazam mythos itself, I knew Mary Marvel was out there somewhere and Captain Marvel Jr. was out there somewhere, and that they had teamed together before whenever one or the other needed help.
Yeah.
So he's obsessing for 2 hours about Captain Marvel needing help. What could it possibly mean? And I do like how Mentor converses with Billy on this. He says that the elders just don't make idle conversation. That sounded pretty real to me. Because when you think about it, what were the elders? A bunch of cartoon guys. But the way Les Tremaine delivered the line, it sounded real. Right. I thought it was good.
They never did that, did they, in the TV show? Did they ever do an in-joke with Mary Marvel or Captain Marvel Jr.?
No, they couldn't. No. I wish they would have. They couldn't do it, and because Lou Scheimer told me, and I asked him, why didn't you bring on Mary Marvel and Captain Marvel Jr.? And the obvious answer was that he told me they would have had to have paid DC Comics for the license. They only had the license to Captain Marvel. Interestingly enough, they managed to get the license for the cartoon series in 1981.
Yeah, but by then they were Filmation. Huh. They really were, I mean, they'd had success with Captain Marvel, with Shazam, with Isis, with Space Academy, I think it was, Arc.
Yeah.
I know I'm blanking on half these shows.
Yeah, Arc 2. Yeah, you're right. Arc 2, Ghostbusters, and a number of others.
Yeah. So we cut back to the plane, and now Susie's calming herself by playing some of her music on her tape recorder, and that's when Dawn realizes that it's affecting the compass. They're 10 degrees off course. Now, most other people, let me go radio in, get some help, but no, this is the interesting thing. Don won't call for help. He's really, to a point of arrogance, very proud.
Yeah. Back to Billy and Mentor. There's another fishing gag like in the first season episode, The Athlete, as you recall.
Yep.
This time, Mentor catches a tire. He doesn't get a fresh fish sign like he did in the first season episode. He catches a tire. And again, I think you're absolutely right, John. You mentioned it before, that fishing is a regular trope in episodes of Shazam. Fishing a lot.
Yeah, it is.
It just came to mind as I think about it, that in the classic Batman series, Bruce and Dick would always tell Aunt Harriet they're off to go fishing.
Yes.
When they're going to do some superhero thing. But in Shazam, Billy and Mentor really are fishing.
Yeah.
So
they never came home with fish.
No, they didn't. No, they didn't. I hope their licenses were up to date. Otherwise, that'd be another lesson we'd have to learn for next season.
Right.
So while they're fishing out here on the beach.
Hey, the plane's in trouble.
Never going to make it to the beach. They're going to crash.
Maybe not.
Shazam!
The way Les Tremaine sells it to the audience, how both actors have their eyes looking up, where there really isn't an eye line. They're looking up and pretending that a real plane is out there. We know there isn't one.
Anything we can do?
Susie, I'm doing it.
Well, what about that other thing, that Mayday?
No, I'm not going to look like a fool. I can take care of this thing myself.
This is an interesting cut. They actually go to a commercial, and then they come back to the rescue. I don't know if you caught that.
Yeah, no, I thought that was really odd that they end the act.
Hurry, Marvel. Hurry.
With Marvel reaching the plane, and he hasn't saved it yet. It's not the most dramatic? Because...
Look there.
It's Captain Marvel. He's going to help us.
It's like unless they'd done something else at that moment, like suddenly there was a small explosion or something and the plane veered away, and then, it's like, holy moly, and go to... But it's like, he gets there, so you're kind of like, everything's fine now. We go to commercial. You would think instead that we would actually, have him, like maybe when the act opens, that the plane's already down. But no, we spend the time bringing the plane down.
Yeah, that is a strange cut. Now, who brings the plane down? Is it really Captain Marvel or Captain Marvel's stunt dummy? That's he's the inflatable guy flopping in the breeze.
Yeah.
Now, we're going to see that same stunt dummy again in a future episode of Isis. Yeah, we're going to see him again, only dressed differently. He won't be dressed as Captain Marvel. He'll be dressed as Rick Mason.
Will they give him a mustache?
I think they put a little mustache on him. I don't know. But he's the same dummy. He's flopping around. He's tied to something. I think dummies have been put in... They probably put real actors out of work. Captain Marvel goes back on board the plane. He manages to let the plane down gently. And Don insists that he didn't need help. And so Captain Marvel says, "Are you going to cancel the Mayday?" "So I never sent a Mayday." Like, what? He never sent a Mayday? "No, I don't need anybody's help. I don't need help from anybody. I could have done this on my own."
Yeah.
Like, oh, geez. Now, here, he even refuses a lift from Mentor, who insists that everybody needs help sometimes. And Don retorts back, "No, I don't need help from anybody. I can stand on my own 2 feet, and I don't need help from anyone." So Don and his girlfriend are going to go all the way to Santa Barbara for a wedding on foot.
Yeah.
Really? How soon are they going to get there? When does the wedding take place? That day? Oh.
Well, it might be because they were flying down originally, but he insists on taking the hike.
Oh, dear.
But you know what, though? We do get something redeeming about him because they do go walk. They see this pollution pile. And this is the good thing about Don. He insists they clean up the mess.
I wonder why this was even put in. They're making an ecology statement in the middle of an episode about needing help. It's a tiny bit distracting, but you can almost expect Iron Eyes Cody to stand by the roadside crying. Now, if you're out in podcast land listening to us, that means that you know this show. It's in the 1970s. You definitely would have been aware of who Iron Eyes Cody was.
Right.
I think everybody who watched television in the 70s remembers him. So Billy Batson then tells Mentor to pull over. They're driving along in the RV to pull over. What for? I think that was an odd choice. He gets out and says he smells smoke. Why couldn't they have edited the scene or scripted the scene to say, "Mentor, I can smell smoke"? Then they can pull over. Instead, he says, "Pull over for a moment." And Mentor says, "Okay, Billy, we'll do it." Whatever. And he gets out and he sniffs for a bit to smell smoke. And then what do we see? What is the redeeming merit for that saves cost on any episode of Shazam and Isis, John?
Oh, stock footage.
Stock footage. We see stock footage forest fire. Now, we've seen stock footage snake. We've seen stock footage wildlife. We've seen stock footage wild animals. But now we're seeing stock footage forest fire.
Hey, look. Smoke. If there's a forest fire this time of the year, it could go like lightning. You call the fire department. I'll take a look.
Shazam!
Mentor calls the fire department while Billy Batson calls on the powers of Captain Marvel to fly to take a closer look. Wouldn't the magic lightning make it worse? What if the lightning instead struck down a treetop on the way down to turn Billy into Captain Marvel?
Is it as bad as it looks?
Worse. It's completely out of control. I'm going to need some help on this one.
Are those kids in there?
I'm afraid they are. But there are a lot of animals in there, too.
Is there anything I can do to help?
Call the elders. I'm going back to see if there's any way to locate those kids.
Fine.
It's funny because he says, call the elders. I'm going to need help with this one. Now, as a kid in the 70s watching this, I can't remember the first time I saw this, but I'm certain I had no clue that Isis was showing up.
Really?
I'm almost positive. I mean, I don't know if maybe I had seen a trailer. Maybe there was a trailer. See, this is the thing. It's like, of course, all this stuff is gone. We're missing all this great stuff. But it's just one of those things. Like now, it's like, yeah, of course, I need help with this. And as an adult, I'm like, oh goody, Isis is coming.
Yeah. Now, I think I remember in my past vague memory there was a trailer for this.
Yeah.
And this was the last episode of the second season, and Isis was well established by this time.
Oh, yeah.
Because it appeared in October, and Isis appeared in September. It coincided with the opening of the second season of Shazam, or thereabouts. So, anyhow, Don and Susie are running off, and what happens to them?
Well, they spot the fire, so they decide to move off in the opposite direction, but it's too late because the fire surrounds them. And once again, and I gotta ask, is this another trope of the 70s? Don falls as they're running, and he breaks his ankle.
Yeah, that's a convenient trope for every writer. It seems like either they're getting their their ankle broken, or it's caught in a tree,
right?
Or it happens caught in a rock somewhere, or caught in a trap. Don't forget that one, caught in some kind of animal trap.
Yeah,
we see this in Isis all of the time. Someone's foot always gets caught somewhere. Like, oh man! If anything, these shows have helped us to watch where we're walking. So Mentor calls upon the elders, and he delivers, I'm afraid, the chant a little better than Michael Gray does.
O elders, fleet and strong and wise, appear before my seeking eyes.
We hear you, Mentor, and we know your problem. There is only one person in the world who can aid Captain Marvel in his present situation. Her identity is as secret as his. But in this case, we will reveal it to you. You must go to her, Mentor, immediately. Time is short.
Come in.
Miss Andrea Thomas?
Yes? What can I do for you, Mr.
Mentor. A friend of mine has a very grave problem. I've been told that you're the only person who can help solve it.
You've been told? By whom?
The elders.
The elders sent you to see me?
They told me who you really are. Isis.
Your friend. Who is he?
Captain Marvel?
Captain Marvel. I think you should tell me the whole story, Mr. Mentor.
Yes.
Oh, mighty Isis.
Goddess Rohalind, let me ride thy mighty wind.
Now, she doesn't use the zephyr winds that blow on high in this episode, does she?
No, she doesn't. She also knows who the elders are.
That's right. She knows who I caught that too as a kid. She knows who the elders are. Now, what do the elders have to do with Isis? That is not established in Isis mythology.
It's no use, Susie. I can't make it any farther.
Don, we've got to try.
Well, maybe if we lie in the river and wait for the fire to pass over us.
No, there's not enough water there to save us from the heat.
Susie, you can make it alone. Please go.
No, not without you.
Have the elders been going behind Captain Marvel's back and giving powers to other people that we should know about? Remember the episode of $6 Million Man, John, where Steve calls Oscar and says, "Hey, Oscar, is there anybody out there like me?"
Yeah.
And Oscar's response is, "What? What? Why do you ask?"
I'm sorry I got you into this, Susie.
And finally, Don is apologetic. And see, that's the thing. As much as Don could be frustrating at times, I never found myself disliking the guy, especially when he was picking up the litter, and now we can see him here.
Holy moly!
Captain Marvel!
Hang on, kids. Reinforcements are on the way.
It's not after the fact that, he says to Captain Marvel and Isis just, "I was a dope." Here he's like, "This is all my fault. I'm really sorry I got you into this."
Yes.
So to me, he's redeemed even before the wrap-up.
Yes, and I think this is an excellent touch that we really haven't seen too much of. Unlike other conversions, if you want to call it that, a conversion where you're not entirely convinced that they've changed.
Yeah.
Spirits of the water, hear me. Help me fight thy enemy fire.
Lay right there, Susie. I'll cover you both.
I'm thinking of the episode The Braggart, where the kid constantly lies. He's a congenital liar. And at the very end of the episode, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'll fix your bike's headlight." His conversion to being a truth teller is not very convincing.
Take it easy, kids. Here comes the cavalry. Welcome, Isis.
Yes, welcome, Isis.
Captain Marvel, I'm very glad to meet you at last.
You have no idea how glad we are.
Yes, thank you, Isis. Thank you very much.
That goes double for me. I think I've learned something very important. If a man like Captain Marvel can accept help, I sure can.
You're right, Dawn. It's a very important lesson.
I'd like to add my thanks to theirs.
No need. It was truly my pleasure.
May I ask one more favor?
Of course. Anything.
Promise me that if you ever need me, any time, any place, you'll call me?
I promise. And now, I must go. Farewell, all. Goodbye.
Goodbye, Isis. Bye.
I loved how Marvel, is telling Isis to call him at the end, when this is all done and the kids are safe. He's like, "Call on me if you ever need me." So I do remember that as a kid, and I do remember getting really excited at the idea of, maybe this will mean future team-ups with the two. Because when you think about it, we talked before about $6 Million Man and Bionic Woman and such, but
Yes.
Really, as much as everybody remembers Bionic Woman, they remember Wonder Woman, Isis had it all going long before that, because she was 1975, and the whole idea of crossing over your characters and basically confirming they're in the same universe, that was long before Bionic Woman and $6 Million Man.
Yes, and I don't think that Universal took their ideas from Shazam and Isis, but you have to believe. But yeah, that's true. I don't think Kenny Johnson, who created the Bionic Woman, took his cues, but you have to believe that they must have been aware of popular shows that might have been on Saturday morning. For all we know, hey, Kenny Johnson might have been watching Shazam and Isis on Saturday morning. I doubt it, but maybe he was. But the thing is, you have this team up, like you say, of two big superheroes, and it would be exciting to see them cross over again. And we will see them cross over again in a few episodes. And it has the effect of cross-promoting each other's television shows, but it's exciting to the kids because you're seeing a superhero team up, and you're not really thinking in terms of gender. You have a female heroine, you got a male superhero, and they seem to get along. They're cooperative. There's no sexism involved, no one comeuppance, nothing of the sort. They act like though they're partners, and they do a good job of it. Now, my late uncle, God rest his soul, he liked this episode. He watched it with me when I was a kid, and he was watching it with me. And he remembers the line, "Look, here comes the cavalry," and how John Davey delivered that line. That was a good line. And the way he delivered it was really well delivered.
Well, that was one other thing, too, as a kid, because I struggled as I know a lot of kids did at the time, with John Davy taking Jackson's place. Because to me, Jackson was Captain Marvel. He looked like he'd just come right out of the comic book. I mean, the physique and everything. But the one thing I always did say was I always thought John Davy was the better actor. And it wasn't Jackson's fault. It was just that John was given more material to act with. So he came across as the better actor. Jackson was, open the bottle, out comes the genie, do your thing, get back in the bottle. John would actually interact, would have things happen. Some of it based on ideas that Jackson said and such. But now, here he is talking with Isis and such, and having her on there sort of like just cemented it. And I was cool with John Davy from that point on as Captain Marvel, because it was like, if Isis is here, then it's legit.
That's an interesting way to phrase it, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's true that poor Jackson got ripped off, because he did give these ideas to the producers and to the writers and whomever. He gave these ideas about how to use the Captain Marvel character more often, and they took his ideas and did not put him in the part.
Yeah.
That was really bad, because he was already established. Remember, I don't know if you've heard this before, but remember the second season opener of original Star Trek, Amok Time.
Sure.
And remember the actor Lawrence Montague? I believe
yes.
He was the one. Yes. He played Ston, and he's a Facebook friend. He played Ston, and he was the rival for T'Pring against Spock. There was serious talks at Paramount, or Desilu Productions at the time, for Leonard Nimoy to leave the show, and for Lawrence Montague to take over the part of Mr. Spock. I don't know if you were aware of that.
No, I didn't.
Yeah, and I think there was some issues over a contract dispute, as there often is, and he was in conflict with Paramount after Star Trek went off the air, when he went to work on Mission Impossible. So there was some conflict going on that probably Adam Nimoy would have insight into. But whatever the case was, had Leonard Nimoy left Star Trek as an actor who established and created the Spock character with all of his mannerisms, and another actor taking his place, it would have been a completely different characterization, and the audience may not have bought it. And it would have been too different, and it would have taken us out of the suspension of disbelief. Possibly.
Oh, I think so.
So I think that you almost have that problem here with Shazam. Not nearly as bad if Spock were replaced and Leonard Nimoy would have left that show. But here you don't have the problem as bad, because there's not as many episodes of Shazam and Isis, by contrast. And also the issue that it is a kid's show. It was not in prime time with major sponsors and a huge budget, and a show that is on the margins and not totally forgotten by any means, but certainly not as remembered as the classic Star Trek. So I do think that there are consequences, unintentional, when an actor who established a role is suddenly replaced. I think at least when the producers told Gene Roddenberry to fire the entire cast when he did The Cage, which was the pilot that never aired at the time, that he still kept the character of Mr. Spock, but when Jeffrey Hunter was let go, and Jeffrey Hunter, his wife, did not want him doing the show anyway, that Gene Roddenberry had the foresight not to replace the character, but establish a brand new character. You see what I mean?
Right.
Shazam has a problem here, and so would any other show where you have a character that's beloved and established by a particular actor overnight being replaced, and it can destroy the illusion a little bit for those who are watching. And I think that that's what happened with you. And it took another character like Isis, who has a strong character in her own right, to help legitimize the second actor who would take over the role of Captain Marvel. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, it does. It does. And it's funny, too, because now in you talking about all this and such, and I have this memory, too, as well, of a kid, explaining to myself what the deal was with John Davy, because, what was I? This was 75, so I was 7. I was 7 years old, and while, I was reading and such, I wasn't as well into yet reading the TV sections, and I don't even know if there had been much news about the fact that, Jackson Boswick was let go and John Davey was replacing him. It may have been a line somewhere in the paper and such, in the back in the TV section on Saturday morning or something, maybe. But anyway, I do now remember trying to explain to myself that this is okay, that Captain Marvel is a figure of magic anyway, so he just looks different.
Oh, that's another way to phrase it. I wish that DC would do a 70s Shazam like they're doing Batman 66.
Yeah.
They're doing Wonder Woman with Linda Carter meeting Batman 66. Or no, they're meeting Bionic Woman. Is that right?
She's actually meeting Batman as well, 66.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So I wish that somebody somewhere over there would do Shazam 74, Shazam 75. Somebody.
Yeah.
Please. We plead with you. Do it. Bring it back. We would love to see it.
Yeah.
And you could have an in-universe explanation for why Captain Marvel looks a little bit different. I don't know if that would work or not. I think that it was Norm Prescott who said the kids will never know the difference. And we're not expected to notice any difference.
Yeah.
But oh dear.
You know what else was interesting about this too? Again, and I always say this, I said it once before, it says something to Michael Gray, but Billy's out for the rest of the episode. Once we call in Captain Marvel, we're done. It's Captain Marvel and Isis, and they finish out the scene, they finish out the episode. We don't go back to anything cutesy or anything with Billy.
You're right. And that seldom happened on the first season. It did happen, but not very often, where Captain Marvel would finish off the scene. Yeah. Oh, yeah, you're right. You counted one time. I think it was the 2-part episode.
Yep. That's it.
Yes.
That was it. And it was so brief, it's not like it was that big a deal.
Yeah. And you wonder, so Captain Marvel here is helping Don and Susie get on board the RV. What happens then? Does Captain Marvel join them? No, I think he flies off and has to turn into Billy, and Mentor has to remember to pick him up on the side of the road somewhere.
Right.
So what about stunts for this episode, John?
Well, there is one. I mean, it's not John doing it. It's a stunt man. But there is a wing walker on the plane, right?
Well, it's stunt dummy.
Is it a dummy?
It's a dummy.
The whole time, though?
Yes.
Oh.
Look on your HD TV screen. Look at him. He's tied to the back of the plane, and his head is back, and he flops a little bit.
So that's not really a stunt.
But again, no, this is actually, it is better. I thought when you're looking at it, especially when I was a kid watching this episode, it was in black and white on a smaller TV. You couldn't tell. Now, with HD TVs and big screen TVs that are affordable and everybody can have them, boy, you can tell.
Yeah.
And it is very noticeable. And again, we're going to see this dummy in another episode of the seasons of Secrets of Isis later on, I believe in season 2.
Yeah, so no real stunts then. But what about fashion? I didn't think anything stood out.
No, nothing really stood out. Although that shirt that Don wears, that is dated. That is really 70s.
Yeah.
That is 70s fashion.
That's true.
Oh, man. Now, I got to wonder, is Isis herself, her costume, now that is a fashion statement. That's a mini skirt.
True.
And we should include Isis in the fashion statement. That is really 70-ish. That's almost late 60s, mid 70s.
Yeah, well, we should have been doing that from the beginning then in the first episode with Isis.
Well, it's any excuse so we can talk about her miniskirt. Right?
And her boots.
And her boots.
Yeah.
Okay, make sure that the word boots ends with the letter T. I almost thought you said something else.
Oh, man.
We'll return after these messages.
You like maple. You'll love the taste of buckwheats.
Buckwheats, the only maple-flavored cereal flakes. Now that's great. Crisp flakes with the rich, brawny flavor of buckwheat with a sparkling snap of maple flavor.
Really good.
High nutrition, too, with buttered toast, juice, milk. Makes complete breakfast. If you like maple, you'll love buckwheats, the only maple-flavored cereal flakes.
Oh, Marge, Harry's boss is coming for dinner and I ran out of food.
Don't worry, Harriet. Here.
Gravy train? But suppose he prefers his food dry.
You don't have to make the gravy to enjoy meaty-tasting Gravy Train. You can serve it dry or mixed with water to make gravy. It's meaty-tasting and completely nutritious either way.
This Gravy Train is delicious, crunchy dry.
It's delicious with its gravy, too.
Gaines Gravy Train dog food. Tastes good with gravy, tastes good without.
And now, back to Shazam.
A poet named John Donne said, "No man is an island." What he meant was that we all need each other. There are a lot of things we can do by ourselves, and it's a good feeling when we can. But it's kind of foolish, and maybe even dangerous, to try to do something by ourselves when we don't know how. Asking for help or advice when we need it isn't a sign of weakness. It shows you're smart. See you next week.
Now, that's true, John. I can vouch for that saying. When I needed help with homework, I sponged off the smart kids in class. So, I do think this holds up. Do you think it holds up?
I do. I do think it does because, honestly, I think most men don't ask for help. I'm one of them.
No, they don't. My problem is I ask for help too much nowadays.
Yeah.
So, how would you rate this episode of Shazam on a scale of 1 to 5 holy molies then, John?
Okay. And only really simply because it's the first meeting of the two, 5 out of 5. I mean, it's not the most exciting story, but it has some great Billy Mentor moments like we talked about and the meeting between the two.
And I agree. I would rate this 5 out of 5 helpful holy molies. It has the appearance of Captain Marvel and Isis's introduction. Now, again, Captain Marvel's seen early in the episode. He's seen it later on, and he finishes it out.
Yeah.
He finishes out the episode. Not only that, you're right. The Mentor and Billy moments are good. The adding to the mythos that somehow that will never be explained again, that Isis knows who the elders are. We see for the first time Mentor using the attorney phone that we'll never see him or another character use again.
Right.
This particular episode took some chances, and it broke with the formula to some extent. And
Yeah,
there's no reference to notifying the proper authorities except for calling the fire department.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's not, again, it's not the most exciting. I mean, there's nothing in the way of real stunt work. It's a dummy, and there's the weird cut. But I just got to say, for the momentous occasion of the two meeting, and the two meeting very well, and like I said, for me as a kid, it legitimized John Davy. So I got to give it 5 out of 5. So.
Yes, this ranks up there, and really, it's a second season conclusion, and it did a good job. The only thing they could have done a little better, knowing this was the last episode to be seen for the second season, they could have given us a cliffhanger to the third season. They didn't do it, but overall it ranks well, and the second season ended with a bang, in my view.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, because we talked about this when Shazam ended its first season, it kind of went out with a little bit of a whimper. It wasn't as strong as we thought it could have been. I mean, it was all right, but it could have been better. Meanwhile, now this one, at least, it's okay. We're going out second season with Marvel and Isis together. Yeah?
Yes, that's correct. Yes, absolutely.
So, 5 out of 5s. Can't beat that. Now, the question is, as we now move into the rest of Isis's first season, are we going to be A, in agreement about the episodes, and B, are we going to find ourselves with 5 out of 5 episodes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We might have some conflict in the future, John.
And especially now we've got the next episode is very special, as we've even got a little audio preview that will play going out here with the credits and such, shows when we cover the episode Lucky. And I remember being gutted by this as a kid, and I'll be honest with you, it still guts me today.
Yeah, so before we go on to any further gutting, we're going to end on a positive note that there's more ahead. And the other exciting thing is that, as obviously we're going to be going into more episodes of The Secrets of Isis, but we are going to begin the reviews of the third season and final season of Shazam also, with a hopeful interview with a very special guest in our near future.
Yes, that would be really cool if we can work that out. So until next time, folks, thank you so much for listening. Once again, Richard, everyone, take care.
See you next week.
And now, more scenes from next week, Shazam Isis Hour, Part 2, Isis. Isis is called upon to rescue a boy whose sadness leads him into a dangerous situation.